Welcome everyone to Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and one of the biggest scapegoats in American military history is Major General JEB Stuart and his absence at the Battle of Gettysburg for the first day and a half of battle. It seems like everyone was asking the question, where was Stuart?
What do you know about JEB Stuart?
I cannot imagine what has happened to General Stuart.
Well, in this video, I outline the movements of General Stuart and show you exactly where he was during the campaign and the circumstances surrounding him not being with Lee as he entered Pennsylvania. Although the title of this video includes the Vindication of Stuart, I'm not attempting to explain away his absence, but simply relay the facts of the matter to you, and when the facts are laid out, I believe that Stuart comes out looking much better than most people describe. Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia had won a major victory at the Battle of Chancellorsville in May 1863, although he had lost one of his favorite commanders, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, in the process. The Army commander decided on a bold move to take the war into the North for a second time. Gradually, Lee began moving his army away from his encampment on the Rappahannock River and up through Northern Virginia. It was in this movement of troops that Stuart played a very significant role, just like he did every time that the army moved. Stuart's job was to block enemy scouts and cavalry from locating the divided sections of the Army of Northern Virginia. General Joseph Hooker, the commander of the Army of the Potomac, knew that Lee was on the move, but Stuart's screening campaign prevented his cavalry from knowing the full extent of the movement. We pick up the Gettysburg campaign on June 22, 1863, when Stuart is given his orders from Lee. Stuart wrote first to Commander of the 1st Corps, James Longstreet, asking for guidance on how he should proceed on the campaign. The horseman knew that he still needed to guard the gaps in the Blue Ridge and Bull Run mountains to prevent Federal cavalry from finding Lee's separated columns, but if he pulled back and marched in the rear of Lee's army, then he would be leading the Union Army right to Lee and give away Lee's plans. When Longstreet received Stuart's note, he passed it along to Lee, and both Longstreet and the army commander wrote to Stuart individually. In Lee's letter, he told Stuart that if 2 brigades could hold the gaps in the Blue Ridge, that he should take the rest of his cavalry north to link up with Ewell's corps, who were already in Pennsylvania at Chambersburg. Longstreet's note informed Stuart that himself and Lee recommended crossing the Potomac River in the rear of the Union Army to hopefully confuse Hooker as to the intentions of Lee, and it would also cause havoc within the Union Army to have a strong enemy cavalry force in their midst. Stuart's next letter to Lee told him that a movement could be made through the dispersed Union Army and across the Potomac between the enemy army and Washington, D.C. On June 23rd, Stuart's aide awoke him to deliver a letter from Lee. Lee told him to leave 2 brigades in the mountains and take the other 3 brigades either west or east of the mountains, across the Potomac, and make contact with Ewell's right flank. By June 24th, Stuart had consolidated his 3 brigades, those of Wade Hampton, Fitzhugh Lee, and Rooney Lee's brigade, now under John R. Chambliss, at Salem, Virginia. He left the brigades of Grumble Jones and Beverly Robertson behind, but he did order Robertson, when it was safe for him to leave the mountains, to place skirmishers at the gaps and at Harper's Ferry and to join Lee. On the 25th, he moved southeast, but Union infantry were using the roads he intended to use, so he waited for them to move on while he rested his horses. On June 26, the cavalry moved to Brentsville, then pressed on to the Occoquan River. The next day, his men occupied Fairfax, where Wade Hampton's cavalry engaged some Federal cavalry, and rode north to Rouser's Ford on the Potomac River. At 3 o'clock in the morning on June 28th, Stuart's men had, with great difficulty, dragged their artillery through the ford and made it to the other side. Wade Hampton's brigade led the way, with the 3 brigades making it to Rockville by noon. It was in Rockville that Stuart delighted in finding 2 things: women and wagons. There was a female academy in the town, and the girls congregated in front of the school to greet the Southern Cavaliers, cutting off the buttons of their jackets for souvenirs. Stuart also found 150 wagons in an 8-mile wagon train full of supplies bound for the Union Army. He quickly captured 125 of them, the other 25 having been destroyed by the teamsters attempting to deny Stuart of all the supplies they could. Before the day closed on June 28th, Stuart's command was in Cooksville and still in Maryland. To link up with Ewell, he needed to hurry. June 29th opened, and the Confederate cavalry rode hard towards Pennsylvania, destroying a small section of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and cutting miles of telegraph lines. It was on the 29th when he discovered that a large contingent of Federal cavalry were 7 miles ahead of him, moving towards Gettysburg. His men bedded down in Union mills. On June 30th, Stuart made it into Pennsylvania near the town of Hanover. It was here that Stuart had a close call with Federal cavalry under the command of Kilpatrick. Chambliss led the way with Fitz-Lee screening the column's movements to the west. Chambliss threw out his 2nd North Carolina Cavalry, who were attacked by an entire brigade of Federals, sending the cavalrymen, including Stuart, in a run across a field. A stream had cut a gully 15 feet wide and 4 feet deep in that field. Stuart, atop his mare Virginia, came to the chasm and made a leap into the air. His aide remarked, "I shall never forget the glimpse I then saw of this beautiful animal away up in mid-air, over the chasm, and Stuart's fine figure sitting erect and firm in the saddle." Stuart regrouped with his men and ordered up artillery to defend the hills southeast of Hanover. He even placed the 125 wagons hub to hub in preparation to burn them if Kilpatrick attacked and he was overwhelmed. No attack came. The cavalry moved through the night and made it to Dover, Pennsylvania on July 1st. His men were exhausted, but he had to find Lee's army. He suspected that at least a portion of them had made it to the Susquehanna River. Indeed, some had, but the army was now concentrating toward Gettysburg. Stuart heard a rumor that Lee's army, or at least part of it, was at Carlisle. So his men pushed on to that town in the hopes of finding Ewell, Longstreet, Hill, or Lee, but all he found was Pennsylvania militia guarding the town. Early that day, Stuart had sent scouts to find where Lee was, and in the night on July 1st, he got word that Lee was in Gettysburg, heavily engaged, and needed him there. After a short rest, the columns of horsemen rode out for Gettysburg between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning on July 2nd, arriving at Lee's headquarters about noon on that day. Stuart brought with him wagons full of supplies, but he did not have much intelligence on the Union Army. Although Stuart has taken a lot of blame for leaving Lee blind during the Pennsylvania campaign, Lee did give him relaxed orders to proceed across the Potomac in the rear of the enemy. Once Stuart performed that task, he was essentially cut off from the Army of Northern Virginia, and he raced as quickly as he could northward when he noticed his marches were taking too long and he needed to link up with Ewell, as Lee ordered. Absolutely, Stuart deserves blame. Buford and his cavalry provided Meade with accurate information on Lee's army and its whereabouts, but the only cavalry Lee had was a brigade of inexperienced horsemen under Albert Jenkins. Despite the problems with Stuart's ride, he was not riding up north getting his name in the papers. He was on a mission to distract Hooker, later Meade's army, and cause as much havoc as possible before linking back up with the army. However, the attacks by Federal cavalry and the capture of such a large contingent of supply wagons slowed his progress. In addition to that, Lee's army concentrated for battle far sooner and at a more westerly location than Stuart expected. I hope this video cleared up many of the misconceptions about Stuart and his actions the days prior to Gettysburg. Remember to share the video to get the word out about the channel, and I'll see you next time.
Historian, historian, where do you roam? Historian, historian, far, far from home. Have history will travel reads the card of a man, a professor with knowledge in the heartland. To educate the world is his mission. A professor of fortune is a man called historian. Historian.